There are roads, house foundations, and a concrete grandstand under one of the busiest lakes in America. The first major gold rush in United States history happened here 20 years before California, and there's a federal mint to prove it. One of the largest wetlands in the country grows islands that tear loose from the bottom and float. The northwest corner of this state is the same coal country geology as Tennessee, and the highest ground in it stands 4,784 feet up. And somewhere off the coast, under about 15 feet of silt, there's a hydrogen bomb the Air Force stopped looking for in 1958. The map calls it one state. None of those is the strangest thing on this list. Here are 30 Georgia facts that sound made up and aren't. Number 30. Georgia has mountains, and not the polite kind. The highest point in the state is Brasstown Bald, 4,784 feet up. The Appalachian Trail doesn't start in New England. It starts here on Springer Mountain and runs about 78 miles before it reaches North Carolina. In the far northwest, the ground drops more than 1,000 feet into Cloudland Canyon on the Cumberland Plateau, the same rock that carries the Appalachian coalfield through Tennessee. That corner isn't the Deep South at all. Now go 300 miles the other way to a canyon that shouldn't exist. Number 29. Providence Canyon. 16 canyons cut into southwest Georgia farmland, some of them 150 feet deep, with 43 colours of sand in the walls. People call it Georgia's Little Grand Canyon. No river carved it. Cotton did. Settlers cleared the land in the early 1800s and ploughed up and down the slopes instead of across them. By 1850 there were ditches, 3 to 5 feet deep. By the 1930s those ditches were 150 feet deep. The historian Paul Sutter adds what the park sign leaves out. Bad farming made gullies all over the south. It made a canyon here because underneath sits about 120 feet of loose sand under a clay cap. That's Georgia dirt destroying itself. Here's Georgia dirt making men rich. Number 28. The gold rush that beat California by 20 years. On the 1st of August, 1829, a newspaper in Milledgeville printed a short notice. 2 gold mines had just been discovered in Habersham County. By the spring of 1830, there were 4,000 men working Yahula Creek alone, and by the end of that year, an estimated 10,000 prospectors were spread across the North Georgia hills, 19 years before Sutter's Mill. We'll come back to what they built with it, and what it cost, at number 19. Number 27. Georgia's northern border is in the wrong place, and everybody knows it. In 1818, a mathematician named James Cammack surveyed the line meant to follow the 35th parallel. He put it almost exactly 1 mile too far south. Tennessee wrote the mistake into law, defining its boundary as the parallel, as found by James Cammack. A year later, his team found they were 661 yards off their own earlier mark, and rather than measure again, they joined the 2 lines together. The true parallel would put the state line in the middle of the Tennessee River, and Atlanta would have legal access to it. Instead, about 500 million gallons a day drains out of North Georgia into a river Georgia can't touch. The legislature has passed resolutions on this more than 10 times and never once filed the lawsuit. Georgia lost a mile of water to a bad line on a map. 200 miles east, it lost a whole town to its own topsoil. Number 26, a town killed by its own dirt. Skull Shoals sits on the Oconee River in what's now a national forest. Georgia's first paper mill opened there in 1811, with a 4-story brick warehouse and a mill village around it. Upstream, cotton farmers were doing exactly what the farmers at Providence Canyon were doing. The soil came off the fields, went into the river, and settled at the shoals. By 1860, the rapids that powered the mill were completely buried in silt. The brick ruins are still standing in the trees, a town that drowned in dirt. That one happened by accident. The next one Georgia did on purpose. Number 25, what was in the valley before Lake Lanier. Congress authorized Buford Dam in July 1946. The gates closed on the 1st of February 1956, and the lake didn't reach full pool until the 25th of May 1959. To make room, the government took 58,000 acres of the Chattahoochee Valley at $25 to $75 an acre. Nearly 39,000 acres went under, and the Corps of Engineers relocated more than 700 families, farms, churches, bridges, a road network, and roughly 24 graveyards in about 2 years, which brings us to what everyone actually asks about this lake. Number 24. What's actually down there? The Corps says it paid careful attention to removing homes, barns, wells, and fencing, specifically to prevent navigation hazards on the lake. That is the opposite of leaving a town standing. In 2010, the lake bed was mapped with sonar and LiDAR. What came back wasn't a village. It was the old channel of the Chattahoochee, house foundations, cemetery sites, dock anchors the size of cars, and the oval of the Gainesville Speedway, concrete grandstands included. More than 9,000 acres of trees were cut in 1957, up to an elevation of about 1,000 feet. Below that line, they left them standing. There are drowned trees down there 60 feet tall. Then in December 2007, drought pulled the lake down 20 feet, and an Associated Press photographer shot those grandstands out of the water in daylight. The grandstands came back. Not everything did. Number 23, the graves. Local researchers working from relocation records account for at least 769 graves moved out of 25 burial grounds. 51 of them were moved by the Corps in 1965, 9 years after the water started rising. Then there's Thompson Cemetery, relocated in 1957. About 24 graves, including 2 enslaved people. No bodies were moved, only the markers. Where descendants refused permission, graves were left in place and covered over, so there are certainly people still under Lake Lanier. Nobody has a number, and anyone who gives you one is guessing. That's the real story. It is not the one the internet tells. Number 22. Why Lanier became the lake everyone calls cursed. 2 true things got welded together by people who didn't check. The first. In the autumn of 1912, after 2 assault cases and a lynching, white mobs drove almost every black resident out of Forsyth County, about 1,098 people. That happened 34 years before the dam was authorized. The second. There was a place called Oscarville, and it was never incorporated and never majority black. The 1910 census for that district lists 513 people, 37 of them black. The Atlanta History Center puts it plainly. The myth of flooding a predominantly black town named Oscarville is untrue. Compressing it that way shrinks the crime. 1,100 people driven out of a whole county becomes one drowned village. The deaths are real, though. State figures put more than 200 on Lanier since 1994. Between 2011 and 2015, it accounted for half the drownings across Georgia's 8 major lakes. The state's explanation is boat traffic and alcohol. Georgia didn't cover old land with water just the once. Number 21. There's a town under Clark's Hill Lake, and it was already dead when the water arrived. Petersburg was founded in 1786, where the Broad River meets the Savannah. Tobacco. By 1800, it was the 3rd largest town in Georgia, with 750 people, and 2 of its residents sat in the Senate together. Then farmers switched to cotton, which needed no inspection warehouse. By 1854, 3 families were left. The Corps flooded the site in the early 1950s. The marker at Bobby Brown State Park says it flatly. Both Petersburg and the old road to Augusta are now underwater. Georgia drowned that one. 200 miles north, it silenced something instead. Number 20. They switched off a waterfall. Tallulah Gorge is 2 miles long and nearly 1,000 feet deep, and before 1913 it had 4 cataracts dropping about 350 feet in a single mile. Then the Georgia Railway and Power Company dammed the head of the gorge and diverted the river into a tunnel 6,666 feet long, running around the falls to a generating station downstream. The falls went quiet. 65-year-old Carl Wallender walked across the empty gorge on the 18th of July 1970 on a 5/8-inch steel cable strung more than 1,000 feet from rim to rim. 18 minutes, 2 handstands on the wire over a 750-foot drop in front of about 30,000 people. The falls aren't gone. Georgia Power releases water on selected weekends, and for 2 days the gorge sounds like it did in 1890. That gorge is cut into old hard rock. 60 miles west, the same kind of rock had something in it. Number 19. The Great Intrusion. That's what historians call it. Not a rush. An intrusion, because nearly all of that gold country was the Cherokee Nation, and the men pouring into it had no right to be there. The reason the gold was so easy to reach is a rock called saprolite. 200 million years of weathering had rotted the bedrock in place into a soft, red clay. You could dig it with hand tools, or blast it apart with a water hose. Number 18. Auraria, and a story that probably isn't true. Everyone in Dahlonega will tell you a farmer named Benjamin Parks kicked a rock loose on a deer trail in 1828. Parkes told that story publicly for the first time in 1894, 66 years later, and the New Georgia Encyclopedia says outright that nobody is certain who found it first. In June 1832, a man built a cabin on the spot. By May 1833, the place had 1,000 residents, 18 or 20 stores, 4 or 5 taverns, and 12 to 15 law offices, which tells you exactly what the legal situation was. Then Auraria lost the county seat to Dahlonega in a lawsuit, and California finished it. Today it's a store, an old bank building, and foundations in the weeds. The town that beat it got something better than a courthouse. Number 17. The Mint. There was so much gold coming out of these hills that Congress put a federal branch mint here. It opened in February 1838 and struck about 1.5 million gold coins, face value over $6 million. Every one of them carries a D. So if you're holding an American gold coin from between 1838 and 1861 with a D on it, that D is not Denver. Denver didn't open until 1906, 45 years after this mint shut. It closed in 1861 and burned in December 1878. The building that went up on its surviving foundation walls is still standing on the campus of the University of North Georgia, with its steeple leafed in gold from the hills around it. That gold is still on a rooftop in Dahlonega. 40 miles northwest, something else from the same century is still in the ground. Number 16. The tunnel through Chetugueta Mountain, 1,447 feet, bored through a mountain at Tunnel Hill. 13 years to dig, and when it opened in 1850, it was the first railroad tunnel completed south of the Mason and Dixon line. In April 1862, James Andrews's raiders ran a stolen locomotive through it, with William Fuller chasing them aboard the Texas. The great locomotive chase went through that hole in the rock. By 1928, locomotives had got too big for it, so the railroad drilled a second tunnel alongside. The new one still carries trains. The old one you can walk through. Here's the part that doesn't get said on the tour. They dug that tunnel through country the Cherokee had been removed from 12 years earlier, which is the half of the gold story that usually goes missing. Number 15. What the gold was taken from. In 1832, Georgia raffled the Cherokee Nation. Farmland went in 160-acre lots, gold country in 40, because 40 acres of gold was worth more. 133,000 Georgians registered, and the people legally barred from entering included convicted felons, free black Georgians, and the Cherokee. That same year, the Supreme Court ruled for the Cherokee in Worcester versus Georgia. Georgia hadn't sent a lawyer, and it ignored the ruling. The Treaty of New Exeter was signed 3 years later by 20 Cherokee men, not one of them an elected official of that nation. The Senate ratified it by one vote. 16,000 people were forced west in 1838, and at least 4,000 died. Russell Thornton's demographic work puts the real figure closer to 8,000 because nobody counted the deaths in the stockades or after arrival. Gold didn't start this. Georgia had been pressing Washington to clear the Cherokee out since 1802, and Cotton wanted the farmland. Gold turned a slow legal campaign into an armed invasion inside a year. The Chief Van House still stands in Murray County, built by a Cherokee planter in 1804. His son lost it in that lottery for employing a white overseer. Hard to square with the story Georgia told itself about who was civilized. If you've got a Georgia fact of your own, or a correction, put it in the comments. I read them. That's the north of the state. The middle of it is older, and it decided more than anybody planned. Number 14. The Fall Line. Running across the middle of the state, from Columbus through Macon to Augusta, is a seam about 20 miles wide, where hard Piedmont rock gives way to loose coastal plain sand. That seam is a fossil beach. In the Mesozoic, with dinosaurs standing on it, that was the Atlantic shoreline. Rivers crossing it break into shoals, and boats coming upstream stop. Augusta, 1736. Macon, sited exactly where the Ocmulgee stops being navigable. Columbus planned by the state legislature for that spot on the Chattahoochee and auctioned off in 1828. Hold on to that seam. It comes back at number 3, and it explains more than the cities. Number 13. Georgia's coastline has been in at least 7 different places. Drive inland, and you cross old beaches, stranded and dry. Silver Bluff, 5 feet above the present sea, Pamlico, 25, and past 2 more of them, Wicomico, 95 to 100 feet, up and 50 miles from the water. Go the other way and the low ones are drowned. Gray's Reef, 20 miles off Sapelo Island, has only been underwater for the last 16,000 years. Divers have brought a mastodon rib up off that reef, and arrowheads made by people who walked on it. Georgia's state fossil is a shark tooth, and you can find them 150 miles from the sea. Here's what happened when armies met Georgia's ground and lost arguments with it. Number 12. 30 hours that ended an era of fort building. Fort Pulaski sits on Cockspur Island at the mouth of the Savannah River, finished in 1847 with walls 7.5 feet thick of solid brick. In November 1861, Robert E. Lee stood on the parapet with the fort's commander, pointed across the water at Tybee Island and said this: "Colonel, they will make it very warm for you with shells from that point, but they cannot breach at that distance." The Union put 36 guns in 11 batteries on Tybee. 10 were rifled, which was the new thing, and the nearest sat about 1,600 yards out. Firing opened at 8:15 on the morning of the 10th of April, 1862, and ran for 30 hours. The wall went from 8 feet thick to 2 to 4 feet, and once it opened, shells had a clear line across the parade ground to a magazine holding nearly 40,000 pounds of black powder. Colonel Olmsted surrendered the next afternoon. Union losses, 1 man killed. Rifling wasn't invented that week. What Pulaski proved is that rifled guns could break a first-class masonry fort from a range where smoothbores were harmless. The breached corner is patched, and you can still see where it was. Number 11, a battle lost to trees. Chickamauga, September 1863. More than 34,000 casualties, which makes it the second bloodiest battle of the war, and by far the bloodiest fought in Georgia. The reason it went the way it did is the woods. The forest was thick enough that a general could not see his own line. Around 11 on the morning of the 20th, William Rosecrans ordered Thomas Wood's division to shift north and close a gap in the Union center. There was no gap. Wood's division moved to a bay, pulled out of the line, and opened the very gap Rosecrans was trying to close. James Longstreet's column hit that exact spot minutes later. The Brotherton cabin still stands on the Tor Road, right where the line opened. The next one nobody was looking for at all, number 10. The prison camp that was open for 6 weeks, Camp Lawton near Millen, was built in 1864 to take the overflow from Andersonville, 42 acres inside a pine stockade 15 feet high, the largest Confederate prison enclosure by area. The only surviving camp record from the 8th of November lists 10,299 prisoners. It opened in early October and closed on the 22nd of November. Sherman was coming, so they emptied it in a panic. At least 725 men died there in that time. Then it was forgotten. In 2009, the Georgia DNR asked a Georgia Southern University archaeologist to look, and artifacts came up on the first day of surveying. Because the camp was abandoned in a hurry and never built over, the prisoner's own lair was still sitting there. Stockade timbers, cut musket balls, and a pipe somebody had made himself with his teeth marks in the stem. That's one thing Georgia left behind and forgot about. Here's the other one. This one weighs 7,600 pounds. Number 9. There is a hydrogen bomb in Wassaw Sound. 2 in the morning, the 5th of February, 1958. A fighter collided with a B-47 bomber during a night exercise off the Georgia coast. The bomber was carrying a Mark 15 thermonuclear weapon, serial number 47782, 7,600 pounds with 400 pounds of conventional high explosive in it. To stop that going off under him on landing, Colonel Howard Richardson dropped it into Wassaw Sound, just south of Tybee Island. The Navy searched until the 16th of April and found nothing. A 2001 survey concluded that if the weapon is intact, it's under 5 to 15 feet of silt, and recommended leaving it there. The Air Force says the nuclear capsule was pulled before takeoff and replaced with a lead dummy. A 1966 Pentagon statement to Congress called it a complete weapon with a nuclear capsule. Nobody has gone down to look. That's what's under the salt water. 90 miles inland, there's fresh water sitting on top of a hill. Number 8. The Okefenokee is not a swamp in the way you think. It isn't a flooded river bottom, it's a peat bog that drinks from the sky. About 75% of the water in it arrives as rainfall, and about 80% leaves by evaporation rather than down any river. Roughly 700 square miles, the largest blackwater wetland in North America, and in July 2026, it was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It sits on a hill. The swamp surface is about 125 feet above sea level, held in on the east by Trail Ridge, an ancient sand ridge that works as a dam, and it feeds 2 rivers going to 2 different oceans. 85% of the outflow leaves as the Suwannee, southwest to the Gulf. 11% leaves as the St. Mary's, which cuts east through Trail Ridge and becomes the state border. Somebody tried to undo all of that. In 1891, the Suwannee Canal Company bought 238,000 acres from the state for about $63,000 and started digging east at the Atlantic. They aimed at the wrong ocean. Trail Ridge was in the way, they couldn't cut through it, and in October 1894 they quit 11.5 miles in. That ditch is now the main boat channel tourists use to get into the swamp, and the ground inside it doesn't stay still either. Number 7. The islands that tear loose and float. Peat on the bottom decays without oxygen and makes methane. The gas collects under a mat of peat until the mat rips free of the floor and comes up. That's called a blow-up. Alligators and snapping turtles stirring the bottom do it too. Once it's floating, seeds land on it. Now, it's a battery, a raft of living vegetation drifting on open water. If it lasts long enough and roots deep enough, trees take hold, and it becomes what swampers call a house, a tree island. About 1/10 of the Okefenokee is tree islands, and roughly 70 of them have names. That's why the ground shakes when you walk on it, and why the name is usually translated as Land of the Trembling Earth. Although linguists reading the Hichiti get something closer to bubbling water, the forested islands don't sail around changing. The map, because the rooted ones are anchored. It's the young rafts that move, so hold that picture. A wetland, 125 feet up, floored with 15 feet of peat. Now ask how it burns. Number 6. The swamp that catches fire. In drought, the water table drops below the top of the peat, and the peat dries. Then fire stops crossing the surface and goes down into the peat body instead, burning inside it. The 16th of April 2007, a downed power line started a fire near Waycross. On the 5th of May, lightning started a second one on Bugaboo Island inside the swamp. On the 20th, the two merged. More than 560,000 acres burned across Georgia and Florida, which is the largest wildfire in the recorded history of both states. Nobody put it out. Tropical storm Barry did in early June. Then in April 2011, lightning again. The Honey Prairie Fire took more than 300,000 acres and was not declared out until April 2012. It smouldered underground for almost a full year, and managers deliberately let most of it burn, because fire is what keeps the Okefenokee a swamp. Without it, the peat keeps building, shrubs move in, hardwoods follow, and the wetland turns into forest. The swamp isn't surviving fire, it's a product of it. From here, the water runs east, and the land stops being solid at all. Number 5. Cumberland Island, Georgia's largest and southernmost barrier island. Nearly 18 miles of undeveloped beach, most of it designated wilderness, and the Park Service caps the whole island at 300 people at a time. Thomas Carnegie's mansion burned there in 1959, and the shell is still standing in the grass. But the thing everybody photographs is the horses. Between 150 and 170 of them, counted every year since 1981. They are not wild, they're feral livestock. The Park Service's own documents say the herd eats between 200 and 400 tons of vegetation a year and strips up to 98% of the plant cover where it grazes, which is loosening the dunes and the marsh edge, and the Park Service can't touch it. A congressional rider from 1997 bars it from managing the herd. It's allowed to count them. Cumberland is where the coast looks permanent. It isn't. Number 4. Georgia's coastline physically moves, and somebody measured it. Start with the tide. The mean tidal range at Fort Pulaski is just under 7 feet. At Virginia Key, off Miami, it's about 2. Georgia sits at the deepest point of a giant curve in the coastline, and the tide funnels into the bend and piles up. Now the sand. The USGS mapped shorelines here back to the 1850s and found the Georgia coast has the highest rates of both erosion and accretion of any stretch it studied. Little St. Simon's Island has been gaining up to 60 feet a year. Wolf Island has been losing 35. At the north end of Jekyll Island, you can photograph it happening. Driftwood Beach isn't decorated with driftwood. Those are trees standing where they grew, killed as salt water reached their roots, because that shoreline is retreating at 6 to 10 feet a year, while the south end of the same island builds. And here's the part that gets misreported. Georgia's coast is not disappearing. Over the long term, it's in slight net accretion, with 61% of surveyed transects gaining. The sand isn't leaving. It's being moved from one island to another by the biggest tides in the southeastern United States. That's the edge of the state rearranging itself. Now back to that seam in the middle. Number 3. The fall line built the economy, and it's still doing it. At number 14, it was a beach with dinosaurs on it and 3 cities strung along it. When the Appalachians weathered down in the late Cretaceous, Rivers carried the finest material to the coast and dropped it in deltas and lagoons. That material is kaolin, white clay, and the belt of it runs from Augusta through Macon toward Columbus, along the same line the ocean sat on. In 2019, Georgia produced 4.6 million metric tons of kaolin, worth about $780 million. That is 92% of all the kaolin mined in the United States. Most of it ends up coating paper, and the drop itself became power. Augusta dug a 7-mile canal in 1845, had a mill running by April 1848, and that canal still generates electricity today. Columbus took the same drop, and by 1853 Frederick Law Olmsted was calling it the largest manufacturing city south of Richmond, Virginia. So the boats stopped there, the mills went up there, the clay was already underneath. 3 cities, an export industry, and a power system, all sitting on one buried Cretaceous beach that nobody living has ever seen. Number 2. Georgia has spent 200 years trying to redraw itself. Start with the line on the map. A surveyor put the northern border a mile wrong in 1818, and the state has been trying to move it back ever since. It has still never filed the case. Then the ground. They blasted hillsides apart with water hoses to get the gold out of the north. They ploughed the southwest until the topsoil left and a canyon opened where a field had been. They ploughed the Okefenokee until the river silted up and buried the shoals a whole town was living off. Then the water. The Corps dammed the Chattahoochee and put nearly 39,000 acres of farmland under a lake. It dammed the savannah and covered what was left of Petersburg. Georgia Power took the Tallulah River out of its own gorge and ran it through a tunnel, and the loudest thing in North Georgia went quiet for 80 years. Then the swamp. A company bought the Okefenokee outright and tried to drain 700 square miles of it into the Atlantic, and was stopped by a sand ridge nobody had surveyed. And on the coast, they've been pushing sand back onto beaches since the 1980s, trying to hold islands still that have never once held still. Every one of those was somebody deciding the land was in the wrong place. The land kept shaping Georgia, and Georgians kept trying to reshape it back. Number 1, the strangest thing about Georgia is the border. 30 facts ago, Georgia looked like one state. Here is what's actually inside the line. Start in the far northwest, on the Cumberland Plateau. Coal country rock that belongs to Tennessee. East of that, the Blue Ridge, 4,784 feet at the top. The Appalachian Trail under your boots, gold rotted into the clay beneath it. Come south into the Piedmont. Old crystalline rock, red clay, and most of the cities. Then the seam. 20 miles wide, running Columbus to Augusta, where hard rock stops and sand begins. That was the Atlantic shoreline when there were dinosaurs standing on it, and the kaolin is still sitting in it. South of the seam, the ground gets younger and flatter the whole way down. The coastal plain is close to half the state, and its basement rock drops to 10,000 feet down by the time you reach the sea. Then it stops being rock at all, black acidic water on 15 feet of peat, growing its own islands and burning in dry years. And then it isn't ground. Marsh, sounds, and sand. The Atlantic rearranges twice a day, and the line ignores every bit of it. Comox border is a mile off the parallel it was meant to follow, and the mistake is still legally binding. The Savannah River Islands were promised to Georgia in 1787, and part of them went to South Carolina in 1990 because nobody had claimed them. Every line on that map was drawn by an argument. Not one of them was drawn by the ground. The map calls all of it Georgia. The land never did. Tell me which one of those 30 you didn't know. This has been States Explained. Thanks for watching, and remember, the map only ever shows you the top.